Welcome to the combat zone, where the enemy's only battle cry is abandon ship, bail out, and take cover. This is the first edition of Combat Zone, folks. I'm Nick, and Joe is my co-host. I hope that you'll join us for our podcast. We have all kinds of things to discuss this afternoon. It's it's an experiment we're going to have some fun with, see how you like it. I know that we've put a lot of effort into it, especially Joe on the technical side. So I want to thank him in advance for that. Boy, I'll tell you, it's been fun to sit here and watch him pull his hair out trying to get all the bugs and wrinkles worked out of it. But I think we've got it now. So welcome, Joe. Welcome, Joe. It's nice to have you as a co-host. I'm looking forward to this.
Right. And you don't have to thank me in advance. You can thank me in real time.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I guess what we might as well dive right in. First of all, the idea behind what we call a combat zone is a chance for us to kind of poke some fun and have some discussion about current events and about a whole host of different things, whatever happens to cross our mind, I guess, that we think that you folks would be interested in. So with that, there's all kinds of places to start. I'm going to let Joseph pick the first topic, and we'll dive right in. So, Joseph, what's on your mind?
Well, the first thing that's on my mind is just setting up what we're going to be doing. So I want to talk a little bit about us and where we're coming from and the perspectives on that. And before we start actually getting into a lot of different topics, I think that's probably the best way to go.
Sure.
Stage fright.
Stage fright. Joseph, all the years I've known you, I've never seen you afflicted with stage fright.
Right. That's true enough. I think it's important to establish right from the word go that our perspective is pretty small c conservative. I don't want to say that we're alt-right. I don't really like the term alt-right.
I don't even know what it means.
I know. Isn't that funny? You know, I was Susan Riley. Is she with CBC or CTV? I don't even remember anymore.
One of the C's.
Or have they merged?
Is there a difference?
Is there a difference? Right. So she once described me recently. Actually, she described me on CTV on one of her panels or a panel she was on as representing the alt-right. And I'm scratching my head and I'm going, I don't even know what the alt-right is. So
I think it's one of these throwaway terms that people use when they don't know how to pigeonhole somebody.
The alt-right. Well, here's the thing, okay? It's not just that it's a poorly defined term. It's not even poorly defined. It's not defined at all. But it's not even original. It's like, and this is the thing about journalists. I don't know if you've noticed this about journalists, Nick, and I know you've been in the media field for a long time in one form or another. So I don't mean to pigeonhole you and say you're a journalist, but you've certainly had a lot of experience rubbing shoulders and bumping elbows with journalists in your career. And one thing I've noticed about them is the herd mentality that they all are afflicted with. That somebody comes up with something that's a little bit original or breaks an original story.
Right.
And the next thing you know, they're all following like lemmings, charging over the cliff. And it's not just that they follow the same story, but the editorial slant and even the language, like alt-right, okay? Even the language they use is the same. So one thing I've learned about journalists is they're not very original thinkers. And, apologies to all of my journalist friends out there, but it's an exercise in follow the leader.
Well, it's more like somebody writes the original story and everybody else just chews it up, regurgitates the same thing, and tries to put their own little spin on it, and usually fails. Because a lot of journalists today suffer from, I think, a very common but undefined disease, and that's called intellectual laziness. It's far easier to meet deadlines. It's far easier to satisfy editors if you don't actually put some thought. And when I say thought, I'm not talking about sentence structure, but I mean, a little bit of thought into what does this mean? How does this affect this particular topic? Or, what point is really at the heart of all this. They don't think in that terms. They think deadlines. They think I got to get every 3 days, I got to come out with a new column. If you're a syndicated columnist, God bless you, because you've got a lot of work to do. And to do it right requires a tremendous amount of energy that I don't think most journalists are interested in putting that much into, especially when cut and paste is so much easier. Now, I'm being a little bit simplified in my description, but show me a better definition of why you read, if no matter which paper you pick up, if it's the Globe or if it's the T-Star or if it's the, pick your mainstream paper, you're pretty much, other than maybe the Sunshine takes a little bit more of the opposite view, but even in that case, you get the same basic viewpoint across the journalistic spectrum. And there's nobody out there. Tarek Fata might be one of the examples of somebody who, cuts a different line than a lot of the other journalists do for his own reasons. But for the most part, journalists are, and I'm being probably unfair in painting with this broader brush, but I'm going to do it anyway. They're intellectually lazy. It's easier. And human beings have this trait within them that follows the easy path. That's why so many of them go over the cliff like lemmings, because it's far easier to follow the herd. Remember something, they're like dead fish. They go with the flow. Only a live fish swims upstream. And very seldom do you see that in journalism today.
And with that thought, let's go back to what this show is all about, this podcast is all about. And I think that listeners have already noticed that we're not really paying attention to any kind of formal structure here. It's a little bit of conservative free association. And, we're let's make it very clear here that we are equal opportunity critics.
Oh,
so
yeah.
if we sound irreverent, we're not just applying this to the left or progressives or liberals or anything like that. But I don't think we have any compunction whatsoever about applying the same kind of standards to stupid conservatives, and there are a lot of stupid conservatives out there, or even perhaps better, people who characterize themselves as conservatives but really aren't for whatever reason. And by the way, I think it's probably a good idea if we just mention who we are, other than just Nick and Joe. So unless you want to stay anonymous.
Yeah, like me, anonymous. Good luck with that.
Right. So I'm Joseph Benamy.
And I'm Nick Vandergraat.
Okay. And you probably know, if you've been following Nick Vandergraat, you probably know him from some of his previous endeavors. And that's Nick's email or texting or whatever, because he didn't turn it to silent. And that's an example of free associating and being equal opportunity critics. What were the shows that you did before, by the way, Nick? You did Nick at Night with CFRA in Ottawa for a long time.
Well, I got my start in Killaloe at the little community radio station there called CHCR.
Population 3.
4 when the dog's home.
Okay.
But we more affectionately called it Weed FM. It was a station that was started by a bunch of people who came up from the States during the 1960s. Some would call them draft dodgers, but Reagan gave them a pardon, and they just never went home. And they settled in the Ottawa Valley, and they have their own community. They still have an actual working commune up there. And it was the other term for the station was Morning Glory Radio. That's the name of the commune, because those are the only people. They're the ones who put the radio station together. And when I walked in there, I was the only conservative voice that they had. And I walked in and said, I want to do a conservative call-in talk show. And they looked at me like a tree full of owls. But when you've got 160 hours of content to fill and only 20 hours live, they said, well, okay. And after 2 years, it was their most successful radio show. Not because I was that good, because I was bloody awful in those days, but because I was speaking a language most people in the community understood. I was talking, I wasn't talking about the joys of hemp, the benefits of marijuana, and down with the machine and all this nonsense. I was talking about current affairs. And from there, I went to CFRA and gave a demo tape to Dave Mitchell, who was the program director at the time. And all I said to him was, I just want a critique, because someday I'd like to do this full time. And the rest is history. I spent 13 years there and loved every second of it. It was was one of the highlights of my life, to be able to sit in that chair with that kind of responsibility and to be trusted with every show except the morning drive which I never did because I couldn't get up that early in the morning, and I certainly wasn't sharp enough that early in the morning. But all the other shows I've done, and I've had a ball doing it, and it was a real honor to sit in for guys like Lowell Green and Michael Harris and the different hosts that they had on in the stable at the time. And now here we are.
And it was a real honor having you sit in, particularly for Michael Harris. And if Michael's listening to this, just a shout out to Michael. Don't take any offense. We're just, as I said, being a little bit irreverent. Tell me something. How the station that you were at in Killaloe when you started out, that must have been a pretty low wattage station. Like, what was the range? Like, how far did the signal go?
I always joked that the signal was so strong it could reach the four walls of the room I was in.
Right.
Realistically, you could hear it in Barry's Bay, which is 20 miles away. You could hear it on the edge of Eganville, which is 20 miles the other way. And you could hear it in the fog heading into Pembroke. So that gives you an idea of the range. It was like 20 or 25 watts.
And did you actually got people calling in?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was terrible. It was the worst radio I've ever done. But from a perspective of, comparing it to any other radio station, there was nobody listening. I got about the same 4 calls every week. I got one from the hills of Wilno. Occasionally I get somebody there. I always had 3 or 4 people who hated me for everything that I said, and 1 or 2 people who loved everything I said, and nobody in between. But everybody in town would come up and said, I heard your show on Sunday night. I really liked it. Well, why didn't you call? Oh, I'd never call in. Because it's too small a town. Everybody knows each other. So from a coverage point of view, I would say maybe 60 square miles at the most on a really good day.
So the fact that you got 4 or 5 people who were actually calling in, given that was the catchment, that's actually pretty good.
Well, when you consider the fact there was no call screener, there was no ability to know who was calling, so you couldn't filter out the real wing nuts, and there were a few of them. Because any talk radio station has a policy. Usually it's 2 calls a week, and this is a very loose general rule. And if you were a complete idiot, they simply would ban you, and you weren't allowed to call in because you didn't add anything to the show. You didn't you made yourself look like an idiot, and the host just, it just wasn't good radio. Because remember what commercial radio is. It's designed to hold people's attention long enough to listen to the advertising so the people will go and buy the stuff the sponsors are selling. Well, if they let too many nutcases on and it drives the rest of the audience away, they're not going to let you on. So that was kind of the rule of thumb. But in Killaloe, we didn't have any of that. We had to take every call there was. And sometimes I get from the middle of a party, somebody call up and blah, 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 and I just hang up on them and pretend the call never even happened. So there was me and my son Peter, who was about 14 at the time. He was the one running the commercials because we had like 3 commercials that we would run. And if there was no commercials, I'd play music and the spot a commercial, train myself in the 15-minute segment. But I'm telling you, it was brutal radio. Like I listened to a little while ago, I listened to some of those very early shows. I was awful. It was terrible. But it taught me what I needed to know in order to make the next step.
That's really interesting. I'm trying to think. I had another question, and it's completely gone out of my mind, which is what happens when you're free associating, by the way.
Yeah.
And by the way, Nick is having a drink of water right now, and he has this secret to making city water taste good.
Yep.
Leave it sit on the table.
And then every once in a while, just
to get rid of, you see, then I'm not even going to bother editing out that bang. When I get round to working my technical magic or anything like that. So, what are some of the things that I suppose we should talk a little bit about current events, things that are in the news right now. And it's not much, there's not much point in talking about the weather. We actually, for those of you who are listening from, warmer climes, we're still waiting for global warming to hit.
Please send me some global warming.
It has, here in Ottawa, Canada's capital, it has been a rather dreary winter. I don't think that it's been exceptionally cold, but it hasn't been warm either. And just the last week, considering, springtime and the time of the year, late March, mid to late March, the temperature is sitting around -10, -15 degrees every night, Celsius. It's just too cold. And I don't mind the cold too much, but I do mind 6 months of the cold.
Yeah, it's supposed to be for now. I try not to use the metric system unless I absolutely have no choice, but because I hate it. And the reason a lot of my kids are always writing me about it. Why do you hate the metric? Because Pierre Elliott Trudeau forced it down our throat and didn't give us an option.
Do you know, it's amazing you say that, because I don't know if I've ever told you this, but it was Canada's conversion to the metric system that confirmed me as just a young puppy as a conservative. I knew then that there was something wrong. And what was that, 1971, 72, thereabouts?
No, it was later than that, 76 or 77.
Well, it was,
well,
there was
whatever.
There was a
70s.
process, but I remember, I distinctly remember being in grade 2. And what year would that have been? Maybe it wasn't grade 2. Maybe it was 1972.
No,
That would have
you're
been
about
10
my
or
age.
11 years old, thereabouts. Anyway, I just remember, because going to school and as a youngster, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, you're learning about miles and you're learning about yards and inches and feet and rods, for Pete's sakes. Okay,
Yeah, I still remember rods. Yeah,
and then so we're learning all this stuff, and it was difficult. 1,760 yards
in a mile,
and 3 times that. So
5,280.
5,000, is it 5,280?
Yep.
Okay, I didn't do the math in my head. But you see, these are the things, of course, we had
That's
to
feet in the mile, by
memorize,
the way.
and we had to know these things already. So, I spent a lot of time, and gosh, when you're young like that, it's all by memory, okay? And, I'm looking, okay, I got these stickers on the chart on the wall in the school, in the classroom, and, you're feeling really proud of yourself, and you bring these test homes with these little, happy face, or it wasn't happy faces, actual
Little
stickers
stars
they
or
were
something.
using. They were little cartoon characters and things like that. I got a sticker, right? And then like all of a sudden, as though you just snap your fingers, we were being told, oh yeah, okay, forget all about that stuff now.
Yeah, I
And
know.
it just puzzled me so much, even as a youngster. I'm thinking, what? I couldn't rationalize it. I couldn't verbalize it, but there was something inside of me that it just instinctively, I knew there was something wrong when I had spent all of this time, and I was proud, and my parents were proud of me that I'd learned all of these things and I was getting competent in, and all of a sudden, we're talking about liters and kilometers. And by the way, don't get me wrong, I actually think the metric system is easier.
If you're in a laboratory.
Having grown up with both, okay, I'm conversant in both systems. And I really do think the metric system it's easier if you're used to it, and that's probably the reason it's easier, because you get used to it. But just in terms of the way it's organized in tens and hundreds and multiples and divisors of those.
Metric is the lazy man's way, because it doesn't force you to think.
Okay, well, I don't necessarily need to be forced to think.
No, I know, but he was speaking generally. Like, he didn't like the metric system either.
Who are we talking
My
about?
dad.
Oh, your dad. Okay.
Now, he came from the metric system,
Right.
from Holland in the 1950s.
Did they use that there?
Yeah. And then when he got over here, he learned the imperial system and really liked it. So when we went back, he was going, this doesn't make any sense. First of all, our biggest trading partner was the United States. It still is. Excuse me. And they used their version of the imperial system. They had a smaller gallon. I think that was about the only real difference, smaller gallon. Theirs is, ours is 4.5 liters to the gallon, and theirs was 3.7 or whatever it was.
Something like that, right?
There's about a quart in the difference.
Right.
So
the gallons were not the same.
That's about the only difference.
Right. I remember that.
Yeah, that's right.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, I had a kid. I filled my truck once, and when I was still a truck driver, and I told the young guy behind the counter, I said, he gave me so many liters. I said, now divide that by 4.5. He said, 4.5? I said, yeah, I want the gallons. He said, no, the conversion rate's 3.8. I said, no, it's not. That's an American gallon. I want a Canadian. I want an imperial one. He said, there's no such thing as an imperial gallon. I said, will you please just shut up and do it? I know I'm not going to stand here and argue with you. And he just couldn't believe there was an imperial gallon.
Right. Well, I think the point that I'm making in all of this is that I'm not anti-metric. I don't care, metric system, imperial, and as I say, I'm quite comfortable with both, and I'm just as happy with the metric system. But I will tell you this: I was just never able to understand how a government could just say, it's like waking up one morning and going, I've got a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's stop measuring in miles and let's just start talking about kilometers and kilometers per hour. And it just seemed to me that was an overreach. I can express it now, but then I just didn't have the capacity and the language and the understanding to express it. But I just knew in the depth of myself that it was wrong, that the government could just do this. And it was so inconsistent, so disrespectful to the way things were. And I'm going, why do we have to change?
Well, who was it in the population who was screaming for the metric system? Nobody. There is nobody calling for us to convert to metric. Nobody. He just got forced down our throats. On top of that, we didn't make a clean break. We still to this day use different elements of the imperial system. Like when you ask people how tall they are, they'll tell you in feet and inches. How much do you weigh? They'll tell you in pounds.
Right.
You go to a golf course, how far to the first hole? 340 yards. Tires are sold by inches.
Right.
Cars are sold by horsepower. This stuff never, there's nothing, because when it comes, especially with marketing, if you go into a car lot and the guy says, man, have I got the hot rod for you, 27 kilonewtons of energy. What?
Yeah, I don't even know what that is.
That's the point. But if you say it's got 350 horsepower, everybody goes, wow, they get it.
Right.
Anyway, I can rage all day about that. But
if you look at the labels on products, food products,
right,
and it'll tell you how many calories and how many kilojoules.
Nobody reads the kilojoules.
I don't really even know what intellectually I kind of know what a joule is. And I was taking physics and chemistry and stuff like that in school. Of course,
it
we
works
had
in
to
a
know.
lab,
But in the real world, nobody talks about joules of energy. They talk about calories. At least in the nutrition world. Yeah. And that works right across the. And look, what do you expect? I mean, we live beside this behemoth, called the United States of America, and it's just natural that there's going to be this cross-pollinization, and people are going to talk this way. They're going to talk like Americans. So
it just didn't make any sense, and I'm just stubborn as the day is long, and I'm just not going to change unless I'm given no opportunity at all. If they'd have made a clean break and said it's illegal, and put fines to it to talk or sell anything in the old imperial system, okay, it would have been a different game. But they didn't do that, and we didn't make a clean break. It's a mess, and I just won't use it unless I absolutely have to.
Yeah, I was down a couple of months ago driving through Pennsylvania, and I was coming up to Harrisburg, and I was listening to a football game, and oh boy, do I have things to talk about with that. But just as before we get off the metric system, so I wasn't really paying attention. I had rented an SUV, and I'm driving along, and I could see what I'm driving at, and I was driving at about 130 kilometers per hour, and I got pulled over. And so the state trooper came over, and which was really, first of all, I have to tell you, when he really surprised me, because I get pulled over. I pull over on the side of the road, and I'm looking in the mirror, and I'm looking in my rear view, my side mirror towards the back, and I'm waiting for him to come, and I'm waiting for him to come. And I wasn't really paying attention to whether he was in the cruiser or not anymore. I was just waiting for him to walk over. And all of a sudden, there's this knocking on the passenger side window, and he'd snuck around on the other side and scared the bejesus out of me, I've got to tell you. Anyway, so I rolled out the window. Thank goodness for automatic windows. And he says to me, he says, how's it going? He says, then I go, fine. How's it go with you?
You tell me.
And first thing he says, didn't you see me behind you? And I said, well, yeah, I saw you behind me, but I didn't think about pulling over until I saw the lights and everything. If that's what you're getting at. And then he asked me, he says, do you know how fast you're going? And I said, well, yeah, I was going 130 kilometers per hour. He just sort of looked at me, and I go, so, I said, really, officer, the truth is, when it comes to you guys, I have no idea how fast I was going. So, yeah, anyway, he dinged me it was a real ticket. I was really worried because I was thinking, okay, I'm behind schedule. I was driving to Washington, and I had to be there at a particular time that evening. And oh my goodness, I'm thinking, okay, he's going to drag me off to see the magistrate, and I'm going to have to pay the fine right away. Which is funny, I got pulled over once. I know it sounds like I'm always getting pulled over for speeding, but it's such a rare occurrence that I remember the specific instances, right?
Yeah.
So I got a number of years ago, I got pulled over in New York State, and they wrote me a ticket, and there's no mention of the amount of the fine on the ticket. Now, I don't know if this has changed, but at that time, there was no mention of the fine on the ticket. So they sent me a notice in the mail, and basically saying you could plead guilty or you could contest it in court. Plead guilty, pay the fine,
right.
Or contest it in court. But you had to enter a plea. Like you had to write down and then send it in. This was the system that they were using. So my wife figured, okay, well, let's decide whether we're going to plead guilty or not. Let's see the size of the fine, right? If it's just a piddly little fine, okay, like I was speeding, so pay it. But if it's a $5,000 fine, okay, well, yeah, we're getting in the car, we're driving down there, and we're going to fight the ticket, or at least get a reduction in the size of the fine. So she called the courthouse and she said, listen, how much is this? We'd like to know. And they wouldn't tell her. They said, look, no, we're not going to tell you. We'll tell you how much the fine is, but we're not going to allow the size of the fine to enter into your equation of whether you're guilty or not. You're either guilty or you're not guilty. Plead guilty, we'll tell you what the fine is. You send a check or whatever. Anyway, so that's what we did. We just said, okay, can't be that much. Pled guilty. And my recollection is that the fine turned out to be somewhere in the low $200 range,
Yeah, it's not too
which
bad.
is, not too bad with the conversion, because at that time the Canadian dollar was low. It's gone up and down a little bit over the years, but relative to the American dollar at that time, it was quite low as well. So to get away with, a $200 Canadian fine was not bad. And I've lost track. You see this again, this is the free association. I've completely forgotten what it was that I wanted to say about driving in. Oh, NFL. That's it. The football. I have to say this, okay? So this was in December. I was driving down to Washington, and it was like a week or 2 weeks after the Grey Cup game here in Canada. Actually, they did play it in Ottawa this year,
yep.
Even though Ottawa wasn't in the Grey Cup. And I have to tell you again, I'm just astonished that you can't get the Grey Cup game, Canada's national institution, older than the Stanley Cup for you hockey fans out there, is the Grey Cup, and you can't get it on regular basic cable. You have to have one of the enhanced cable packages that includes a sports channel, and it's played on the sports channel. Now, I don't have a particular objection to that. Look, the CFL, the Canadian Football League, is a commercial enterprise. It's privately owned. People want to earn money, and I make money. I get that. I'm very supportive. Rah, rah, rah. If you have to have somebody out there leading the cheer for your right to make as big a profit as you want, I'll be there. Just give me a call, okay? What I don't understand is that I can't get it, but I can watch the Super Bowl on basic cable for free, except, of course, I'm paying for basic cable on Canadian channels. So Canadian channels don't carry the Grey Cup, but they'll carry the Super Bowl. And I that astonishes me. It particularly astonishes me because of all the talk about Canadian content and promoting Canadian history and Canadian culture, etc.
From a business point of view.
No, I get it. But every time, okay, because it's we talked a little bit about your background. So for listeners out there, so that they know, my background is very political. I've been involved in conservative politics in the provincial and federal level in this country for decades now. I'm almost 56, so it's been some time that I have been, and so I'm familiar with these policy debates, and one of the things that I know is that, okay, yes, first of all, government wants to promote Canadian culture. So we have all of these regulations and rules, etc. And I don't agree with them, but that's the government, okay? So let's take that, package it up, put it on the shelf over here. My problem on this particular subject is that the private institutions, the private companies that you're referring to, you're saying, well, it's a private company, they have the right to do whatever they want. I get that. But then when you talk about introducing more competition to the market, so maybe somebody wants to remember all of the talk about Sun News at the time, and other networks. That then these guys come back, these private networks, the private companies come back and they say, "Oh, but we're playing such an important role in promoting Canadian culture and Canadian content, etc." So they use that as a way of trying to block out competition and limit competition, and almost to manipulate the regulations that the government, I think, wrongly imposes to their benefit. So, I don't blame government regulation for this. And again, if that's what they wanted, if they don't want to broadcast the Canadian Football Championship, all the power to them. They have the right to make that decision.
My argument.
I am astonished that they do that, and then they play the American Football Championship.
But see, that's not where I was going with this.
Okay, well,
from a marketing point of view, okay, if you want to grow the sport and grow people and attract people to these specialty channels so that they'll watch the sport for the regular season, not just one game, you have to put it out on basic channels for free. It's a cost you have to bear in order for the long-term health of the league that you're trying to promote and grow and make money from. You can't take one of the oldest championships that is as Canadian as the Northern Lights, for crying out loud, and say you can't watch it. We're going to make you pay for that. We're already paying for it through our basic cable. There's all kinds of subsidies that get built into this, and we can't watch it. Wait a minute, something's wrong. So I'm thinking from a business point of view, a private enterprise point of view, yes, I'll bite the bullet. That's what advertising's all about. You don't always see an immediate return on advertising. It takes time to develop like when you have an advertising scheme as a business, it's not a one-shot wonder. You have a long-term strategy, and part of your long-term strategy should be at the end of the year, we're going to show you what you've missed over the previous 16 weeks or 18 weeks. And this is, I just can't get my head around these companies like, not ESPN, but TSN and Sportsnet, who say, no, it's all ours, it's all ours, it's all ours. You got to watch it through us. Fine, but make it free for that game.
I can't believe that we've been talking about the media.
I know.
And we haven't criticized the CBC once.
There's
something
the CBC deserves
wrong.
it, that's for sure.
See, this is what happens when you free associate. Look, we're running up here against a half an hour. I think that the time
we haven't even done politics yet.
We haven't. Well, that's, again, the problem with free associating. Okay, so listen, this is just the inaugural show, guys. And we're going to be back with more for sure. And I promise that we're going to have a little bit more structure. And trust me, we're going to talk more about current events and politics, and not just Canadian politics, but world politics, etc. So don't listen to this particular broadcast and think you've got the whole sample.
Oh, good Lord, no.
By far you haven't. And by the way, just in closing, I just want to point out to everybody out there who's a CFL fan that Nick Vandergraat is a Hamilton Tiger Cats fan.
Oski wee wee, buddy.
Okay, so don't hold it against him, but full disclosure, I thought it was really important to know that that Nick Vandergraat is a Ticats fan.
And he's a Maple Leafs fan, and his team is on fire.
Yeah, no, that's Nick. I'm not a Maple Leafs fan.
I'm working on him.
Okay, so that's great. And I hope you had fun in this inaugural opportunity to visit the Combat Zone, and send us your comments at comments@thecombatzone.ca. That's comments@thecombatzone.ca. And who knows? Maybe we'll include some of your emails in some of our broadcasts. And remember, the more radical and insulting that you are, the greater the chance of you actually getting included in this particular podcast.
Don't think it'll be a positive inclusion, but it might get included.
Okay, we're having too much fun. So that's it. We'll talk to you next time.